Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. The Bet with the Best podcast is sponsored by Amwager, an ADW built by horse players for horse players. Speed, power, and ease of use are at the core of Amwager, designed to give players the information and tools they need to quickly make anything from a simple win bet to a complex, structured superfecta or pick 5 wager. When you combine that with data and pool updates that are up to 60 times faster than the competition, Amwager is the clear winner in wagering on races online. Those are just a few of the many special features that Amwager has to offer, along with live video and race replays, free, integrated form-to-win past performance information, conditional wagering, and true odds, which are a prediction of off odds based on all available pool data. That and much more. Amwager is licensed and operated in the U.S., and best of all, they will actually pay you to play. If you sign up now and deposit and bet $150, you will earn a $150 lump sum bonus. So there is no reason not to give Amwager a try. If you want to bet with the best, then you need the best tools to wager with. You need Amwager. Welcome to episode 30 of the Bet with the Best podcast. This is part 2 of a 2-part discussion with legendary Sheets player Len Friedman. So we'll pick up the discussion where we left off at the end of part 1. So I want to spend a little time on a couple of the questions that are sort of similar but different. Grass racing. It's different than dirt racing. From the Sheets perspective, you know, your patterns, are there different, or is it? I mean, is it just the same? I mean, do you approach a turf race differently than a dirt race when you're looking at the Sheets and trying to form your opinion?
I guess the simple answer is yes. The patterns are different. Grass horses repeat their races much more often. The grass horses run in a tighter range of numbers than dirt horses. It's true of all grass horses, but it's particularly true of distance grass horses. Sprinting grass horses, they bounce around, you know, much more than the distance grass horses do, but not as much as the dirt sprinters do. So grass racing in that sense is a little more predictable. The horses tend to run what they've been running. And you would think that would make it harder to find value, but our experience over the years is that actually grass racing is easier to find value. And I don't know exactly why this is the case, other than the possibility that our grass numbers are better than what other people are evaluating the horses at by a bigger extent than the dirt numbers are. Grass racing is harder for people to, make, let's just say make numbers, make performance ratings for grass races. It's harder because of the rails that exist on grass courses, the fact that there are different grass courses at a track that may be different on a particular day. Maybe one of them was watered and the other one wasn't. There are a lot of things that make it harder to do accurate numbers for grass racing unless you have a lot of information and a lot of understanding of what can affect the numbers for a race. So that's my guess why we do better on grass than dirt. It isn't because the patterns help us as much as just the power of the numbers.
So it sounds like, in general, especially with the routers, there's less variance from race to race. They tend to be running in a tighter pattern, so you don't get as much of an edge from, the reads of horses swinging back and forth, but the numbers themselves may be relative to the numbers other people use might be providing value. Do you think that might be because ground loss could be maybe even more important in a turf race than a dirt race?
Well, I don't think the ground loss is more important, but I think that it's more important because the horses are running in a tighter range. And it's not so much a question of which horse is going to run well that day and which horse is going to run bad. It's which horse is a little faster or likely to get a little more of a ground-saving trip, that will determine who wins the race. There's an awful lot of grass races where the first 3 or 4 finishers run pretty much the same number. The spread isn't all that much. And it's much less of a spread than in similar dirt races, similar in distance and class. So in the dirt races, the crucial question was figuring out who is likely to run one of their good efforts that day. In the grass races, you can pretty much assume that several of the horses are going to run one of their good efforts. And you have to figure out which one's good effort is a little better than the other one's good efforts. And look for one that's, maybe a little better or just as good and is being overlooked in the betting.
And maybe more likely to get the winning trip, right? The trip really.
That's right, yeah. Now, the one thing about grass racing that's negative as far as I'm concerned as a bettor is that a fairly significant portion, I'd say maybe 20% at least, of the grass races are what we call slow paces. That is, the horses run slow early, and they run so slow that they can't make it up in the later stages of the race. And we make a correction for the numbers that we give the horses in those races. We subtract from what they actually earned by their final time because they didn't have a chance to run their effort. But the reality is that the horse that goes to the lead in those slow paces has an incredible edge because it's very hard to close into the fast late fractions of those races. Horses just can't move their legs faster than a certain speed. So nobody can run that last 16th of a mile in 5 seconds flat. There isn't any horse that can do that. And the horse that has the lead, an eighth of a mile or a 16th of a mile before the finish line is probably going to win the race if the pace has been very slow. And sometimes you can figure it out beforehand that it might be a slow pace race. You can look and see that there's only one horse that ever shows any speed, and that horse is going to be allowed to go to the lead and just run it however fast it wants to. And you can stay out of the race. but sometimes you get fooled. Sometimes there's a race where it looks like there's plenty of speed, but all but one of the speed horses decide, well, not today. We're going to rate our horse today. I mean, there was a race like that at Belmont on Belmont Day. There was a mile race that was just ridiculous. These were top quality stakes horses, and the half was something like 48-3 or 48-4, and the grass course was lightning. I mean, they ran at least 2 seconds too slow for the first half of the mile. Well, the last half mile was just a joke. Nobody could catch the horse who was in front. And that horse was just going to win. I mean, I'm not saying this because I got cheated out of anything. I didn't bet the race. And I just watched it. And when I watched it, I said, boy, am I glad I didn't bet this one.
Yeah, I think many of the listeners will will agree with everything you just said about those slow-paced races, and the fact that, especially in New York, it seems like they happen a lot more often than they used to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, which can be very frustrating, like you said, when you try to anticipate what's going to happen.
Yeah, you just try. You can try to figure out, if it's a likelihood that this is going to be one of those slow-paced races. But I'll tell you, there may be people who can figure it out in advance, but I'm not one of them. I pretty much have to just play the grass races as they come. I mean, I do take a look, and every once in a while I see that, this is going to be no good, because the horse who's going to have the easy lead is not a horse I like. Well, okay, so I'm just going to pass it. That's all, and just watch the race. But it's just one of the things about horse racing. There are problems. There are difficulties. I mean, we'd like to know if the horse had a fever any time since its last race, but nobody's going to tell us. And at least nobody's going to tell those of us who don't try to get that information. I mean, there's a lot of successful players I know, and including people who use the sheets, who also spend a lot of time, effort, and money finding out if anything's happened to any of the horses in the race since the last race. They have, connections to people who know trainers, and they collect that information as part of their play. And now a lot of them use sheets or use other ways to evaluate how fast the horses have run, because they're not going to bet on a horse who's too slow just because, it's been training fine since its last race. There's no point in that. But they want to know if the horse has been training well since its last race. I don't tend to get involved in that. I just use the sheets. I'm probably the last of the purists. I do look at trainers, and I incorporate my estimates of trainers in my handicapping decisions. But I don't really look at much else. I mean, I look at whether a horse is likely to save ground or lose ground in a race and make a little adjustment for that. But mostly I'm just reading the patterns on the sheets. And that's about it for me.
So I'll follow up the question about turf with the other surface, synthetic. Any opinions on that and how that impacts the way, if at all, that you look at things in terms of the sheets?
I look at synthetic races, same as I look at grass races. I make the assumption that grass horses will run on synthetic and vice versa. I know that there's a percentage that like one of the surfaces and not the other, but my estimate is it's a very small percentage, and it's better just not to take that into account. Other than that, it's the same thing as grass. That is, the more horses repeat their numbers, they run in a tighter range. I don't know if it's true for sheep players in general, but I like synthetic races. I think I probably bet a higher percentage of races on poly than I do on grass or dirt. I
and why
find
is
more
that, do
play
you think?
Well, one reason I think is that the odds sometimes reflect people's opinion that this horse likes synthetic or doesn't like synthetic, or likes grass or doesn't like grass, of horses that are going back and forth between synthetic and grass. I think that there's more bad decisions that people are making on a horse that's run more races on grass than synthetic, and now it shows up on synthetic, and people conclude, well, that's a grass horse. And much more often than not, it's both a grass and a synthetic horse. It doesn't make any difference which surface the horse runs on. And I think I get some edges off of that in handicapping and just strictly odds. Yeah.
And so that your kind of bias is, yeah, I'm going to treat this horse as equally capable on either synth or grass, unless I got a whole lot of data to the contrary. Whereas you think a lot of other people might say, okay.
And I need a whole lot of data to the contrary, because I'm not too big at drawing conclusions from 2 or 3 efforts. Yeah.
So people might see a horse. I was just going to say, so people might see a horse that had maybe one bad effort on synth or one bad effort on grass, or, there's a little bit of variability, and they'll read more into that, you think, than you're just going to assume, unless I see a whole bunch of bad races on one of the surfaces, I'm going to assume that they can run equally well on either.
That's right. And I found that that's been a useful approach. And I don't have any hesitation about that approach at all, even in the face of a lot of people telling me I'm crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who really don't like playing the synthetic races. But it sounds like you look forward to those, and that you're maybe more likely to find value in a race on synthetic than you are on dirt or turf, it sounds like.
I think so. I think probably, it's maybe 25-30% more synthetic races, that I play than grass or dirt. Naturally it isn't more races because there's only a few synthetic tracks. It's basically Woodbine and Gulfstream. For me, anyway, because I don't play the West Coast.
What about Turfway Park?
I don't play Turfway.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to switch gears. We spent a lot of time, great discussion on kind of the condition handicapping and sheets and patterns. I think some of the listeners will be, our sheet users and will be very familiar with it, but I think this will be maybe cause a few of the listeners, some of them, to be thinking a little bit differently about how they approach handicapping. So that was great. Now I want to talk to you more about how you bet your opinion. We've talked about how how you form the opinion, and now how you bet it. So maybe starting with like, a particular race, and you either have a strong negative opinion or a strong positive opinion or both on a race. How do you tackle? What pools do you typically play? Are you like just a win better, exacta, try, super? And how do you kind of structure tickets if you're playing more of the exotic plays?
Well, okay, so let's start with if you have a positive opinion on a horse. The first question I would have to ask is what kind of odds level is that horse going off at? If the horse is going off at, let's say, 20-1 or more, and that's the horse I want to key in the race, the likelihood is that there are horses in the race that could easily beat my horse, even if my horse runs well. I mean, if the horse is over 20-1, in most situations, I'm not saying every situation, but most situations, there are going to be several other horses in the race that are as good or better than my horse is. In general, I may have an opinion that my horse is going to run better that day because of a pattern read, but still these other horses have numbers that could easily beat me. And in a race like that, I'm going to key my horse almost certainly down to the third position in tries. And in some cases, if I think there are other long shots that could get in, I might even key it down to the fourth position. Now, I'm going to try to find throwouts in the race. I'm going to try to find the horses that I can eliminate in the race. But let's say it's a 10-horse field and I only find 2 horses that I think are just, irrelevant to the race. Well, I'm going to use my horse with the other 7 horses. I'm going to play them on top of my horse in exactas, and I'm going to play them on top of my horse in tries. I'm probably going to weight it depending on which of the other horses I think are the bigger threats. But I'm going to try to cash if my horse finishes first, second, or third. And if it's really long and it's not too many horses I have to use, I'll key it down to the fourth position. Now, I'm going to play more on a higher percentage of my play in the win than in the exactas, tries, or super. I'm going to, maybe, play half the bet to win, a quarter for second, 15 for third, and 10% for fourth. I might make a weighting something in that area. It depends how I feel, and there's a certain randomness to these situations. Because maybe you'll have, like there was a race I played the other day where I had an 8-1 key, and it was a 6-horse race. There was 1 throwout, and there were 2 horses that were, to me, very minor plays. One that was sort of a somewhat solid horse, and then one that I was really afraid of. That if you put me against the wall, I thought I would think that horse had a much better chance to win than the 8-1 I was keying. I mean, I didn't mind keying my 8-1 shot because the other one was 3-5. But I had a very significant percentage of my bet in that race with the 3-5 shot on top of my horse. And it was only a 6-horse race, so I only played a win bet and saver exactas. I didn't play it any more than that because if I played it any more than that, I wasn't going to make any money. If it came in third and the 3-5 shot won the race, there was no way that I could play tries to make any money. The only throwout I had was, I think, a 25 or 30-1 shot, so it wasn't relevant. And the try takeout is bigger. It's harder to have value there. unless you have some value from your handicapping. There's a built-in negative when they take out 25%. So, there's a lot of variations in how I would play. As my projected key horse, the odds get lower, I'm not going to play it as far back. If it's only a 10-1 key, I'm not likely to play it to the fourth position. If I don't think it's a solid enough play to make down to the third position, then I shouldn't be keying the horse. And if it's 5-1 or less, I often don't even play it down to the third position. I just put a win bet in and some saver exactas. But I play more when my opinion in the race is a particular horse is the key. I don't generally play exotics with that horse in top. My whole play with that horse in the first position is a win play. And I try not to be too much of a wise guy that I can figure out the exact order of finish in a race. And I know that doesn't work out well sometimes. I mean, there was one time where I was doing some handicapping in public in the racing form, and I picked the Belmont 1, 2, 3. Well, I didn't have the try. I liked the winner of the race. That was my big opinion, and I had a win bet. And then I had some savers with the second and third place horses on top of my horse. But I didn't have any jumping in on that try, because there's 100 other races where the horse that I liked won, and some horse that I didn't like at all came in second. I don't want to not cash those races. If I have a good opinion, I want to cash. That's my prejudice. And
so
that means...
Oh, keep going, sorry.
Yeah, so that means that if it's a long shot, I want to cash if it finishes 1, 2, 3. If it's over 20-1, I don't want to go home with nothing in my pocket when that happens. But that's my prejudice. That's sort of like a psychological thing. I mean, I know that if all I did was bet the horses that I was keying to win, I would actually win more. It would work out better in the long run, but there would be a lot more streakiness to it. And those negative streaks, the 8, 10, 12 times in a row where you don't cash, that's hard for me to deal with. And it scares me that if I put myself in a position to have streaks like that I'll start getting conservative in my handicapping. And that would be no good. In other words, I'll start looking for sure things rather than overlays. And there aren't any sure things. At least not to me.
So I want to kind of summarize. Yeah, I just want to kind of summarize what you said. So when you're looking, at least from the we're talking about when you just, in your main opinion is a positive opinion on a horse, you look to key that, and you're going to key that. It depends on where, how deep you go in the verticals, depends on the price of the horse and how many horses you can eliminate. So you're trying to find your key horse, find the horses you can toss, and then you don't try to get too cute after that. You basically say, all right, I'm going to play my key horse to win, and then I may play an exacta, try, or super, but all those plays are just safer plays with my key horse either in the 2 spot, the 3 spot, or the 4 spot, and I'm going to include all the horses I didn't toss in that bet. I may weight them differently based on my opinion of, here's a horse that really scares me versus one I'm not as scared of, but I don't want to toss. But you're going to use them all to some degree. And if you hit to win, you'll cash the win bet. If the horse runs second, you'll cash the exacta bet. If it's long enough price, you may also play the try. So if it runs third, you hit the try. But you're not going to have a case where you hit the win and the exact and the try and the super. You're going to hit one of those, and that's what you're trying to do with your key horse. If it runs in any one of the spots you play it in, you'll hit that bet and that bet only. But you're going to bet it in a way, weighting things where you make a profit as long as it finishes, in one of those slots. And the reason you do that, even though if you just bet to win, your lifetime return investment will be higher. You're trying to reduce the variance, those losing streaks, so that you'll stay aggressive with your handicapping. You won't start getting conservative, and you still will. You're still betting in a way that enables you to make money long term. It's just maybe not as much. You're willing to pay that kind of insurance, the price of that insurance. Recognizing long term it's less, but in terms of making sure you continue to stay aggressive and you don't have to go through these extended losing streaks, you're willing to take a little bit of hit on the long term ROI. Is that a fair evaluation, or do you want to correct anything I said? Or
no, that's a fair evaluation, except for the fact that I absolutely believe that if I took the more aggressive betting approach, I would not be making the same bets. That those losing streaks would affect my handicapping, and I would start getting to be conservative in handicapping, and I think that would be bad. In other words, I don't think I'm costing myself any money by doing this, because I think I would make errors if I took the other approach and got stubborn about it. I'm pretty sure that my psychology wouldn't work well.
That's it.
In the original days when I was first using the sheets and everything in New York, I used to play 2 to 3 times my regular unit on the trifecta almost every day. The trifecta was just a great bet in New York, and I did not play the trifectas the way I just described my current betting approach. In those days, I would try to find the long shot key, and I would play it in all 3 positions with whatever horses that I liked in the race. And I played the tries like that in those days because the tries were a tremendous edge. Even though the takeout was bigger, the public's approach to trifectas was to so overbet the favorites in those races that if you could get the favorite out of the money, you got like 3 to 4 times what you should have gotten from those tries. Now, that's no longer the case. The bettors have caught up. I mean, I think that what it was that when the tries were first introduced back in those days, a lot of the bigger bettors and the more sophisticated handicappers didn't play them. It was mostly public money in the trifecta pools. And the public money always has the favorites over bet in the exotics. And in particularly when you get down to tries where there are a lot of possible combinations, and people who are betting smaller amounts can't cover very many combinations, and therefore they have to take big positions, and they usually take a big position on the favorite in the race. They don't take a big position on the 20 to 1 shot. And so I was taking a big position on the 20 to 1 shot. and I was getting the edge of a lot of big payouts. Now, that's no longer the case, in my opinion. In my opinion, the tri pools now have as sophisticated money in them as any of the other pools. And so there's no particular edge in approaching it so that you're playing your horse in all three positions in the tri pool rather than playing it in the win pool and the exacta pool for second. You're just not getting anything extra on all that. And so my feeling is that it's not worth doing that anymore. Now, there may be other people who have a better judgment on, how to play tries and everything that are still getting an extra edge there. It could be, but it's not me.
No, I think what you said about how those exotic pools have gotten, there's more efficient. I think most of the guests we've had on this show would absolutely agree with what you said. I just want to go back to a little bit of how you described your approach. To me, I kind of have most players, I think you can put in 4 quadrants based on their handicapping and their betting. And, either you can be, and this is oversimplifying it, but aggressive handicapper or conservative. And then by aggressive, I mean you're typically willing to key horses that are, less likely to win, longer priced, versus people who are more focused on, shorter price favorite type horses in your handicapping. And in the betting, you can be really aggressive where you're really trying to hit it out of the park with the way you bet, or you're more conservative where, you're trying to reduce the variance and you're willing to, give up some return for a higher hit rate. And to me, listen to you talk, you're very aggressive on the handicapping side and you want to stay that way because you feel like that's your strength. But you want to stay that way, you kind of need to be a little more conservative in the way you bet so that you don't, get a little gun shy if you hit losing streaks or, you don't start becoming conservative in your handicapping. That might be, again, it's oversimplification, but that's kind of how I'd put you, as very aggressive handicapping. And you've at least over time have become a little more conservative in the way you bet, just because you want to make sure that you don't let the mental side of the betting end up impacting the way you handicap.
I think that's fair. I'll accept that.
Well, I mean, again, so the listeners can kind of think for themselves, where would they put themselves in that quadrant? Are they aggressive handicap or conservative? Are they aggressive bettor or conservative? Because, if you're in that quadrant of aggressive bettor and aggressive handicapping, which I think you might have been at some time in the past, that can be, on the highs can be really high, but the lows and the losing streaks can be really low. You got a lot of variability. And it sounds like your sweet.
I think what you're saying is true. When in the early days when I was playing, I would say between the middle late 60s and the middle late 70s, I was an aggressive handicapper and an aggressive bettor, and there was no problem because the edge was big enough that there weren't any long losing streaks. And it just didn't happen. That's all. And we had an enormous edge over other bettors because of Ragozzin's ability to make those numbers. I mean, he just gave us, such a big head start on the betting pools that you could be aggressive and still not have long streaks. I mean, there were so many times when we were betting the best horse in the race at generous odds. And frankly, the number of times that happens today is pretty slim. I would say in an average week, I feel I'm lucky if I'm able to bet a horse that's 10 to 1 or more, it's just solidly the fastest horse in the race. I mean, it happens. I mean, I don't say it never happens, but it doesn't happen a lot. And when I was playing in those early days, even though I was playing almost all the races when I was going out to the track, I mean, if I went out to Aqueduct, it was a 9-race program, I was usually playing 7 or 8 of the 9 races. Even so, I had a big enough edge in each of the plays that I was making that I wasn't going to have a real long losing streak. But that's not true anymore. The bettors are much more sophisticated. People have a much better idea who the fast horses in a race are. It's only on, I'm looking at 3 or 4 tracks a day. And as I said, there's probably only 2 times a week where you get a horse at 10 to 1 or more that's just the best horse. And so, it's just part of the way the game is developed, and you have to adjust to it.
So you've had to adjust by being a little more selective about the races you play. You're passing more races, and the way you bet the races, you've become a little more conservative. That's kind of how you've adjusted over time.
Yes, I've felt that I had to make both of those adjustments.
So let's talk.
Now that's true of races where I'm keying a horse. Now there are other races where I'm essentially boxing against horses that I don't like. Although I will say that's much fewer bets than the horses that I key on. Mostly I'm keying on horses. Once in a while I find a race where I don't like the favorite at all, or maybe 2 of the 3 short price horses in a race, and I box against them. And I find that play every once in a while. Frankly, I don't think I do as well on those plays as I do on the keys that I make. I think on my boxes against the throwouts, I'm not even sure I end up ahead on those plays. And for whatever reason, I do better identifying a long shot and keying that horse than any other horizontal plays, any other vertical plays. I mean, the horizontal plays are different.
Yeah, that's a good transition. So talk a little bit how you approach the horizontals when you decide to play them. What sort of a sequence are you looking for that's going to get you interested? Which horizontal pools you play most often?
Okay, well, I don't play pick sixes. I have in the past, and I don't anymore. I never like playing them. The tension and pressure of them is annoying to me. I don't like sitting for 3 hours waiting to see what happens. And it's so much of an all or nothing kind of play, because when you're playing pick sixes, you're not going to hit very many of them. The idea isn't to try to hit 1 out of 3. The idea is to try to hit 1 out of 10 and have a big score when you hit it. But it was psychologically difficult for me to deal with them, so I don't play them at all anymore. The only time I even think about it is when it's a 20-cent pick six and it's a big carryover. I can make a modest play and not give a damn about it. So that it's not really an important play on the day. But I do play pick fives. I like pick fives a lot. To me, it was an enormous edge when they created the 50-cent pick 5 play because I can now, at my unit, often play all the horses in all the 5 races that I want to play. I don't have to make a tough toss because of the unit of the bet. If it was a $2 bet, I don't think I'd be playing them very often because, the problem with playing things like pick 5s and pick 6s is that it's an all or nothing. You either hit it, but if you're right in 4 of the races and wrong in 1, you don't get anything. There's no consolation for being almost right. So if you're going to play pick 5s, you've got to hit a reasonable percentage of them. But with the 50-cent unit, I've found that I can often cobble together a play. I would say that maybe 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 of my bets these days are pick 5s or pick 4s. I don't play too many doubles or pick 3s because often the pools aren't big enough, except for, like when they're at Saratoga, then I might play doubles and pick 3s because those pools are big. But pick 4s and pick 5s, most tracks have them at 50 cent now, and I can often cobble together a play where I feel I'm getting enough value by tossing out some short price horses in, I would say at least 2 of the races, preferably 3 of the races, that there are some short price throwouts and that I'm using enough horses that are going to be decent odds so that I have a chance for a score if those horses happen to win. But to me, in a lot of those races, there are 4 or 5 horses that I regard as all having a decent chance to win, and the 5-2 shot often, to me, has at least as good a chance as the 10-1 shot that I'm also using. So I know that I'm not going to get that 10-1 shot, a high percentage of the time. I'm just hoping to get it a decent percentage of the time. And I'm hoping that, I'll catch a race where I get 2 of those, longer shots that to me are somewhat random, but still horses that have a decent chance to win. And I'll get, a good return on the pick 4 or the pick 5. But I spread enough that I try to hit a lot of them. And sometimes I hit them and lose money on them. Because none of the long shots that I thought had a shot actually came in. I mean, I hit all the races, but it didn't do me any good because the prices were too short. But still, that's the way I play. And people who have told me that I'm doing it the wrong way and that I should construct, a more selective approach to playing those horizontal wagers where you don't have any tickets, where you have 3 short price horses on the ticket because they're not worth having because you're not going to make any money anyway. But to me, it's too much trouble to create all those tickets because I'm just doing it by hand. I'm not doing it with some kind of computer program. And also, it doesn't bother me so much if I hit it and I break even. So I'll live, or even if I lose 20% of what I played, and it really wasn't worth having that combination. It's okay with me. I'll live to play another day. I didn't lose any money, and I'll find some other bet to play.
So it sounds like to get you that you play quite a few of the pick fives and maybe pick fours. Typically, you're looking at least two or three of the legs though to be to at least eliminate some shorter price horses, right? If you can't eliminate any short price horses in any of the legs, that's probably one you're going to pass. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, and I'm also going to pass it if I just don't have enough throwouts. I mean, I'm not going to play ridiculous amounts into these pools, just to have one winning ticket, which, more likely than not won't even cover the cost of the play. I mean, there's got to be some value in the tosses. Either in getting rid of a lot of horses in a lot of races, or at least getting rid of a significant number of short price horses in the races. I would say that let's do a pick four. I would say that if in a pick four, if I can't get rid of two of the top three choices in two of the races, I'm not likely to play. The only situation I would play a pick four if I'm not doing that is if one of the four races I'm just getting rid of all the short price horses. Yeah, I mean, if I have a situation like that where there's a 10-horse race and I'm eliminating the first four choices and everybody else is 8-1 or more in the morning line and figures to be that long, well, that'll be enough for me to play that pick four. But it would have to be something like that unless there's two races that I can make some kind of significant elimination of the horses who are going to be bet.
Are you trying to narrow it down to one or two horses in one of the legs, or are you willing to spread in each leg if you're eliminating enough short price horses?
I'll spread in all the legs. I'm happy if I have a leg that I only have two horses in. I'm happy if I can single one. I mean, every once in a while in these things, my basic play is my single, that I think I have a single that's enough value that it's worth playing. But I'll tell you, on those question of those singles that are enough value, it has been much more often that if I had bet that horse to win, I would have gotten a better result than I got by playing the pick four or the pick five, singling that horse. I would have been better off with the win bet.
Do you do both? Do you bet to win and single it in the pick four?
And that's how I try to adjust for that. Is to make half of my bet to win and half of my bet to single it in the pick four or the pick five. Because I've seen that happen so often to me that, I have a 7-2 shot and I end up making 8-5 on my money. In the pick four, because it can easily happen. I mean, even if I'm right in the other three races, and the horses that I include win, the shorter price horses can win. And sometimes, you get tricked because there'll be a race. At least I get tricked because I don't look and see what I think the odds are actually going to be. I just use the morning line. I mean, if a horse is listed 2-1 in the morning line, I figure it's going to be 2-1, but some of those horses end up being 2-5. And when they win, they just kill the price of the pick four or the pick five. And it can easily be, for me, a race where I'm using 4 or 5 horses. That's just the kiss of death. I mean, I'm just massacred when that happens. I have no chance to make any money on my play. And I don't know, maybe I should try to figure out how to estimate what the real odds are going to be. But I just don't seem to have that ability. And I can't read how they're going to read the trainers. And I don't know. I get the feeling in some of these races that, there'll be a fast horse in the race, that maybe hasn't run for 3 or 4 months, but there are a lot of people that know that this horse is ready to run. Now, I have no way of knowing that. All I can do is look at what numbers the horse ran, know whether that trainer is particularly good at getting horses to run off of a gap, But the truth is that the people on the inside are going to have a much better idea of whether that horse is going to run well or not. They're going to know how the horse has been training. They're going to have the information I don't have. And it may enable a lot of bettors to single that horse in the pick 4, pick 5, where I have to use, 3 or 4 other horses because I'm not sure that horse is going to run well, and I want to be covered in case it doesn't. So there is that problem that I find in playing them, but on the whole, I feel I get a lot of edge in it, and I think that my results in the pick 4s and pick 5s is probably better than my overall results. They're probably better plays for me than anything else.
Even than your win betting?
Even than the win betting. The pick 5 is got a lot of built-in value to it. It's generally a smaller take than any other bet. At most tracks, that's true. That it's like a 15% take, and the other takes range from 17 to 25. And it's enough that betting with a significant size unit gives you an edge because it's an all or nothing bet. You either hit it or you don't. You don't get credit for 4 out of 5 at most tracks. There are a few that you do. I mean, I think Gulfstream pays consolation, although it's a much smaller part of the pool that goes to the consolation. But my feeling is that there is sort of that built-in edge in the pick 5s. I think you have a little more edge than shorter horizontals in, let's say, somebody knows that their horse is training super, or, they fixed something since the last race, blah, blah, blah. They're less likely to go into a pick 5 than they are to play, maybe a double or a pick 3, or bet the horse to win, or key it in verticals in the exotics. There's people who have that kind of information. They often don't have the kind of handicapping expertise that they can play 5 races in a row with any intelligence at all. So I think you sort of avoid some of the more informed inside information that as a handicapper we're always playing against. So I sort of like the pick 5 in that regard. The small take, the fact that it's pushes people to the limit on their handicapping options. And I feel that I have some kind of advantage. But, there are a lot of situations where I can't play it. Like there's a lot of tracks, particularly this time of the year, that the first race is a maiden 2-year-old race with mostly first-time starters. Well, I have zero opinion in that race. I don't have any opinion on first-time starters. I mean, I know that I'll often have to have an opinion when I'm playing horizontal wagers, and if there's, a couple of first timers in a race here or there along the way, I'm willing to make, what I hope is an educated guess as to their chances of winning. But if it's a 10-horse 2-year-old race and 2 of them have run and 8 haven't, I don't want to be trying to guess what's going to happen in that race. I mean, unless Wesley Ward has a 3 to 5 shot, I guess you can assume that horse is probably going to win. But for the most part, I just stay away from those races. And if that's the beginning of a pick 5, unless I really have big opinions in the next 4 races, I'm just probably not going to play. I'm probably just going to skip that one and look for another pick 5 someplace.
Or the pick 4, right?
Or the pick 4, yeah. But at a lot of tracks, the pick 4 pools are nowhere near as big as the pick 5 pools. And the takeout is much bigger in the pick 4 pool than it is in the pick 5 pool. And that makes it a much less advantageous bet. I think if you look at the payoffs at tracks where the first 5 races are a pick 5 and the second through the 5th races are a pick 4, and you look at the pick 4 payoff and you multiply it times the win price of the winner of the first race, the race that wasn't in the pick 4, you will find that the pick 5 payoff is 30 to 50% better than the pick 4 payoff times the winner of the first race. And part of that is because the difference in takeout, and part of it is just that pick 5s are stretching people, to have an opinion 5 races in a row.
Yeah, the takeout can be extremely different. I mean, like you said, some tracks have 12 or 15% or even 10% pick 5, and the pick 4 is 22, 23, 24% takeout. So it can be pretty extreme difference there.
Yeah, I mean, none of us are winning at more than a 10% rate in horse racing. I don't believe anybody is doing that well. I think it's possible that people who are getting big rebates and, have that kind of connection and everything, maybe they're, making 8 or 10% on their bets, although my impression from what I've heard from people is that even the people who are getting those kind of rebates, the truth is they're only making 2 or 3%, and without the rebate, they'd be losing. But, I mean, partially they're only making the 2 to 3% because they're betting so much. I mean, some of these batch computer people are betting way too much. They're killing their own prices. So they're betting into a larger take, but that's more than offset by the rebate, which is creating a much smaller take. I mean, I do get some rebate, but it's more modest. I don't play at any of the places that you can get big rebates from. And I don't know why exactly. I'm just sort of comfortable playing where I am. I like the betting platform. I do get little bonuses here and there that do add up over the course of a year. So I don't feel I'm taking that big a thing, and I don't bet at the level that would earn me those big rebates. I mean, my unit's, reasonably large. And I'm sure by the average horse player standard, it's large, but they're betting really substantial amounts. I mean, they're betting, $5,000-$10,000 into a race. I'm not doing that. And I don't have any interest in doing that, to tell you the truth. Because in order to do that, you'd have to have the bigger rebate because you'd be killing your odds too much. And I don't want to have to worry about all that.
All right. So anything else on the betting side? I have a few final questions, kind of on some other topics, but anything else about betting that we haven't gotten to that you want to bring up?
The only thing I would say is that the most important thing is to be betting with monopoly money. Yeah, I've always bet with monopoly money. I've never bet with money that mattered to me. In other words, if I lost all my bets, I was still going to have a nice dinner. It wasn't going to change my style of life. Now I live pretty simple. I don't spend a lot of money because there's nothing for me to spend a lot of money on. There's nothing that I really want to do that I don't do because it costs money. But it would be very hard for me, I think, to play if I had to worry about, was I going to be able to pay the rent this month if I lost? And I don't think anybody should play that way. I think if you're playing the horses, you've got to be playing with money that doesn't matter to you. That's just my prejudice.
Mark Kramer. Yeah, Mark Kramer said don't play. He called it scared money. That it changes your whole mindset, and not in a good way.
Well, I think that's true, but I think it's also a better rule of life, if I may be so bold. That is, gambling is bad. I mean, I sort of regret that I'm in a situation where the profits that I make are based on the fact that other people are losing money that they don't have to lose. I mean, I don't mind it if Bill Gates is betting into the pool and getting killed. That's fine with me. But, it's, not great that people who can't afford to play are playing and losing. I mean, I don't think too many of the people involved in your podcasts are in that situation because you're appealing to people who are more serious players and they probably have the funds to, bankroll their plays, without being under pressure.
Right. So I do want to. You're kind of hitting on the last few questions. Like, so if you were going to, given all the experiences you've have had as a horse player, what have you seen with most players is the biggest mistake they make that if they would correct that, they could really improve the results? What would be the one thing that you see is the most common kind of mistake players are making?
They don't buy the sheets. I'm sorry. That's all I can come up with. I don't know what mistakes people make or they don't make. I'm very isolated, and even when I was playing at the tracks and being around other players, I paid very little attention to them, and I had hoped they were paying very little attention to me. And I just have no idea what other people do. I do believe it's a mistake not to get the sheets. On the other hand, I'm very happy that most people don't get the sheets.
You're right, because
better
in
for
the
me.
pari-mutuel world, yeah, they're your
That's
competition.
right.
Well, let me ask
Yes.
it a little different way.
Too many are getting them as it is.
So let me ask you a different way then. What's the biggest lesson that you learned that when you, that helped you improve your horseplay? What was the biggest lesson learned in your growth as a horse player that really made a difference in your horseplay?
Well, I mean, the first thing was learning how to be more sophisticated in reading the sheets. That was the first thing that had an impact on me. And I would say, God, after that, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I really haven't changed that many things that I've done over the years. I mean, I've adjusted to various things. I mean, I think being a little flexible is a good idea. I think also having, a reasonable understanding of how you're doing. That is, in the early days when I was playing, I kept records of all my plays. And I divided them into different categories, males, fillies, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and older, sprint races, route races, dirt, turf. I broke it down. I broke all my bets down. And I broke down how I did in each of those categories. And I think it's something that, as a horse player, you have to do, because there's so many categories. You're going to not be able to have a good seat of the pants idea of how you've done in different categories. And you may be able to pick out the ones that you did terrible in, and maybe the one that you did the best in, but the rest of them are all going to sort of mush together, and it's going to be harder to determine where you should concentrate your handicapping efforts. I mean, like I learned, first of all, when I was when I made that analysis, the one thing that jumped off as by far the worst category was older cheap male sprints, and that was sort of important, because the truth is there's a lot of those races in horse racing, unfortunately. And in those days, there were even a higher percentage of them. And I never did well in those races. And after that year, I mean, if I bet 10 of those races in a year, I'd be surprised. I mean, the bet has to be so overwhelming that I just can't resist it. And even so, I'm not sure that I make any money on those races. And I learned that I do better on filly and mare races than I do males. I do better on route races, I do better on grass races, and I do better on stakes races. Well, knowing that means that when I come to those races, I look at them more carefully. I mean, I know that those are the races I traditionally have had a better opinion on, and therefore those are the races that I should particularly look at. Now, I look at all the races, and if there's a pattern or a read in the race that there's some horse that's just a ridiculous prices against its number power, I'm going to check that race off to consider playing. But I'm going to look at the races that I've traditionally done better on a lot harder. And I'm going to end up betting more of those. And I think that's the right approach, because I think that different handicapping approaches lead you to do better in different types of races. And I think that using the sheets has a certain prejudice to it, that there are types of races that are better. And also it depends a lot on your approach in using the sheets. And what I'm looking for pays off a higher percentage of the time in the kind of races that I do better on. That's all. And so I concentrate on those. But that's about it.
But that was a good, I had meant to ask that question. I'm glad you brought it up, keeping records of your play and helping identify what your strengths and weaknesses are. Several of our guests have talked about that, and it sounds like that was useful to you as well.
Oh, I think it was, yes. I can't imagine how much money I've saved not betting those older male cheap sprints. And also, I learned early on in that thing that while grass racing was a big plus, sprint grass racing was a minus. Now, in those days, there wasn't anywhere near as much sprint grass racing. And I do look at sprint grass races now. For I'd say 20 or 25 years at least, I didn't even look at them. When I got to those races, the sheets just went into the wastepaper basket. I wouldn't even risk looking at them because my results were so bad. But now, particularly in the longer sprint grass races, the 6.5s and the 7s, that I find you can handicap. The 5 and the 5.5s, I should probably still be throwing them in the wastepaper basket, and I hardly ever play one. I mean, maybe I'll get stuck in the horizontal, having to handicap one of them, but to actually make a bet in one of them, I mean, once in a blue moon, I find one, but I don't think I do too badly on the ones that I find, but that's because I'm cherry picking, ones that I think are just irresistible plays. And even so, they don't do any better than the other categories. If I played just the ones that I thought were, that looks like it could be a decent play, I'd get killed on those. My handicapping approaches don't work for 5 and 5.5 for grass. I just have to accept that. I don't play 5 and 5.5 on the dirt either. Short dirt races, I stay away from. There's something about the way that I look at horse racing that doesn't mesh with playing those races.
But it's good to know that and acknowledge that, right? Yeah. So, there's a lot of value.
After you beat your head against a stone wall, you tend to adjust.
So, anything else that you had that we haven't covered that you wanted? Anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on?
I don't think there's anything else. My good friend and partner Len Ragusin is gone, but I always want to make sure that I, give him credit for developing this whole system of handicapping and analysis of horse racing, and and also I want to give credit to Jake and the people in the office who've continued the tradition of making very good numbers. I mean, I still do a little work, but I'm, a little restricted in the work level that I do. Age does creep in now and then. I mean, I still play a lot, but I play a lot fewer tracks than I used to. I mean, there were days in the past where I used to go up to Lakes Region Greyhound, where I had a really good rebate situation, but that was because I knew the person who owned the track. I was a very large player by Lake Region Greyhound standards. I mean, in their dog races, the pools rarely got up to $1,000, so they were used to somewhat smaller play. And I used to go up there and I would play 7 or 8 tracks, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and maybe, altogether making 40 or 50 bets over the weekend. But I don't do that anymore. I couldn't do it even if I wanted to do it. And it takes a lot of energy and concentration. And you can't play horses, sort of cavalierly. You're always having to adjust for the odds. And if you're not going to be successful. And at this point, 4 tracks in a day is a lot for me. I don't generally play 4. I generally play 3. And I'm usually only making maybe 6 to 8 bets a day. And that's a big day. There are days where I'm only making 2 or 3 bets.
So you really have become more selective in terms of the races you play.
Well, yeah, I've become more selective, and I just don't have the energy and concentration to be looking at every race, at 5 or 6 tracks, and making all those decisions. You just can't do it once you pass a certain age. I mean, I'm in my early 80s. And I have to recognize that, I've slowed down. I just don't have the same kind of energy I had 30 years ago. It was nice, but I have to do what I'm comfortable with, and I think that may be the other thing that, to answer some of your earlier questions about, what advice for horse players, you should only do what you're comfortable with. If it's a strain, it's a mistake. You don't want to be rushed into decisions. You don't want to be pressured that there's 4 races going on at the same time, and it's, hard to keep track of all of them. It's a tough enough game just as it is. And it's unfair that the sports bettors only have a 5% take, and we got to play a 17 to 25% take. I've always felt that's unfair. The racing take should be between 5 and 10%, and that's it. But the state tax people are not too happy with that idea. And so
it's a good idea, though.
It's a good idea, but we're stuck with the game as it is. And so we have to sort of be careful to stay within our own limits. And look, I know that there's going to be some time when probably I'm not going to be able to concentrate enough to keep playing. I assume that's going to happen. I don't know what, growing old entails, because you don't know until you get there. But yeah, it's part of the way that you've got to play. You've got to be comfortable in what you're doing. It's a very tough game, and the takeout makes this, really one of the hardest gambling games to play. And so you gotta be very careful how you structure what you're doing, that you're not adding additional burdens onto your probabilities.
I like that.
So that's about it. I don't think I have much else to say. I wish everybody good luck. And it's a lot of fun. Even with all the ups and downs, I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed making numbers. I mean, I love doing that in the office. For a period of time, sort of as the in-between from rags and, doing all the numbers. Then I started doing some of them, and then I started doing a lot of them. And now it's transitioned to Jake and some younger people doing them. But I enjoyed doing the numbers. That was probably even more fun than betting. I mean, the mathematical challenge of making those decisions was exhilarating to me. It was just something that I like. I don't know why it appeals to me, but it did. And I enjoy talking about it. So I've enjoyed this.
As I have, and as I'm sure the listeners will. And if they want to learn a little bit more about what we've talked about in terms of the sheets and your approach to handicapping, the book I mentioned early on in the show, The Odds Must Be Crazy, where you and Len Ragusin.
You can forget about that, because your chances of getting that book are slim and none. As far as I know, it's long been out of print, and there's an occasional copy on eBay, that's available. But if you want to know more about sheets handicapping, go to the website, thesheets.com, and read the introductory materials, and then get a few of the early tapes, condition handicapping. And, you might find it interesting. And, particularly if you're into math and patterns of numbers and things like that, I think it's fascinating, but that's me. I'm very prejudiced. And the other negative is that you'll be listening to me drone on and on those tapes. Some people have told me that it was very good for improving their sleep patterns. That I could put people to sleep better than anybody. But I think you might enjoy the tapes if you're into horse racing, and maybe you'd find a copy of the book someplace. Who knows?
Well, I can find it on my bookshelf.
I don't have a copy anymore.
I
let
my
copy out, and I've never replaced it, because I went on eBay once and they were asked, somebody wanted $50 for the book. I say, you got to be joking.
Well, I'd highly recommend it to anybody who can get their hands on it. It's a great book, and especially if you're not familiar with the sheets. But like you said, there's probably nowadays easier ways to learn, including, was it thesheets.com? Was that did I get that right?
Yeah, thesheets.com. Yes. I mean, we also have an online place where you can buy sheets. But the sheets online is where you can get the introductory materials and the tapes. I mean, the tapes are, I think we charge $5 a piece to cover the shipping. Yeah, they're not being sold to make any money off of them. But you might get interested. You might even start using sheets. People get involved in different ways. At least you'll know what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Len. This has been great. The time has flown by. I'm always amazed when I have guests like you that how quickly the time flies, how interesting the conversation is. I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy it as well. So thank you very much for joining us. And I want to thank all the listeners out there as well for supporting the show. And may you boldly go where no horse player has gone before.
Okay, and thank you again. I enjoyed it very much.